Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to the Human Energy Field. As always, I'm your host, Henry, and as always, joined by my co-host, Jamie. How are you doing tonight, Jamie?
Hola, I am doing well, thank you very much. Excited to be back on the mic.
Back on the mic, back where we belong. Often imitated, never replicated.
It's all getting a bit 90s hip hop now, isn't it?
Hi, I mean, we could take it that way if you really wanted to, mate. If you want to go back to the grill again, that's where we'll go. Do you know what I'm saying? Although we do have a special guest to come on to get exactly 90s hip hop with us, but that'll stay tuned for maybe a bonus episode, you know. I feel like it's prudent to begin the episode with a little brief announcement for you guys. If you're listening to our podcast, then I'm sure you enjoy role-playing games, maybe even Dungeons and Dragons, maybe even playing games with friends around tables in real life. If these align with your interests, then you'll be happy to know Trial by Dice is coming up at the end of next month. That's the end of November, Sunday the 28th to be exact. Trial by Dice is I don't want to say annual, or used to be an annual event hosted by friends of the show, longtime friends, the Dungeon Punks, and it's back. And we're going to be there. And I'm excited. As always, taking place in the Temple of Boom in Leeds. Myself and Jamie are both going to be turning up. Jamie, are you playing or are you dungeon mastering this time around?
The previous couple of Try by Dices, I GM'd the first time, and then I was a player the second time. And I have been thinking on this backwards and forwards, but yeah, I've gone for a player ticket, so I'm going to be playing this time. I had good fun playing last time. GM was great. I was actually ended up being on the table of the guy who won last time round when it occurred. More into how you can win at Dungeons and Dragons in a minute, but yeah, he was a great DM, and I met some great guys around the table, and I always love catching up with, as you say, the Dungeon Punks guys and some other guys and stuff. And I'm especially looking forward to this year because, as like most of us, if not all of us, we haven't seen people for a while, and it's going to be nice to catch up with the people that I speak to digitally quite often, and get them all in one room and share that time playing. Although Dungeons and Dragons is not my favourite game, I've always said this, I can let that slide for the purposes of, community and fun and charity, because Dungeon Punks are always doing this for non-profit and charity. So, when you support a Dungeon Punks event, you are also supporting some good causes and some good people. So even more reasons to get involved. Pay your $5, go to Dungeon Punks, follow the links to wherever you listen to them, Instagram, whatever, and get yourself a ticket. It's well worth the trip, even if you just go up and down for the day, or come the day before, or whatever you have to do. It's always a great day, and I'm sure this will be no exception.
It is. It's a lot of fun. I always look forward to it. So if you fancy that, coming up at the end of November in Leeds, UK, have a Google Dungeon Punks Trial by Dice. Get yourself a ticket, or alternatively message me or Jamie and we can poke you in the right direction to get yourself a ticket for this. We'll both be there, so do come and say hi. I will be selling copies of my book Care Mundus as well, and there may just be one copy up for a prize for a very lucky player or DM. So if you fancy a chance of winning a copy of Care Mundus, then do come down to Leeds and take part, and who knows, you might get lucky.
I think it's also worth noting out that it's a waning crescent moon on the 28th of November, so eat sensibly at that weekend as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, that's probably the most important part of this whole episode now. So listeners, you can go ahead and just turn off the episode now. That's as long as you're aware of the lunar cycle for the end of November. What else do you really need to know?
Hey, for those who aren't paying enough attention, looking at our sister Luna, so.
These lunatics. I don't know, do they? But yeah, it would be great. I'm really looking forward to it. So guys, come down to Trial by Dice. I imagine we'll chat about how it went after it's happened. So if you're listening further afield, just stay tuned to hear about how the day went. No doubt there'll be Instagram stuff going on as well, so you can follow from afar.
No, do you know what? I think you were saying we'll tell people how it went. I've just thought of this now, so throwing this out there. Maybe what we should do is a special kind of post Trial by Dice episode where we can maybe get a couple of people on who were there, tell us about the games they ran or the games they played in, or the event they were running themselves. If we get Igor or Bordy or whatever on, or just whoever we'll meet down there who can maybe shout out and see who wants to come on and do like a full episode of, trial by dice, reminiscence, breakdown, post-mortem, etc. I think it's worth doing.
I like that, yeah. Post-trial by dice, little PTBD.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, so what you're saying is whoever buys us the most drinks will get to come on, is that what you're
100%,
saying?
100%.
Yeah, okay.
Want to be famous? Yeah.
Yeah. Come and say hi either way. There'll be hugs going all around. I'm probably, I'm looking forward to seeing people I've not seen in a long time. Looking forward to seeing people for the first time who I know are coming this year, who've not been in previous years. So yeah, just come and say hi. I'll be the chiseled, handsome, charming individual. Stand out for miles. You won't be able to miss me. Jamie, I mean, you can't miss Jamie. You can spot Jamie a mile away. But
yeah,
we are easy to find, and very much looking forward to meeting you guys. It's going to be great. What is Trial by Dice, Jamie? How does it work?
So I've got to preface this with, anything we say isn't, official Dungeon Punks literature. I can just say how we found it in the years past. So I'm probably butchering the idea. If those guys are listening, I apologize, but I think I'll get the essence of it right. It's a day when people can get together and, in the loosest sense of the term possible, play competitive D&D. It's competitive in the sense that the GMs will all be assigned random players. They will play an adventure throughout the day, and then the players will anonymously score the DMs on various categories, fun, inclusion, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And then those scores will be tallied, and one of these DMs will come out the, in brackets, winner. But I think they would love to say that, the main thing is about everybody getting together, playing, having fun. The competitive element of it is kind of, just a very small, minor byproduct. That's just a nice thing to do. Because at the end of the day, as we've always said, and it's one of my mantras, if you are having fun, then you are playing it right, and, you're winning the game. But it is competitive D&D. So it's, as I say, I've ran a game the first year, and then I played the second year, and I think the idea was the GMs would not come with a story pre-prepared. They would meant to sit down, and they are given 3 words, which all GMs get the same 3 words, and those 3 words are meant to inspire the GM to create an adventure specifically for that day, for those players, and there's a period of time at the beginning where players can create their characters and GMs can fashion the game, and then they go ahead and play in a set time limit, which is obviously, the full day on the Sunday. I don't have an issue with this, but I did notice on both occasions that there were definitely GMs who came with a fully fleshed out adventure beforehand. And like I say, I don't mind. If people were having fun, that's great. I don't really think that fits the spirit of it, but I also can appreciate that some people maybe just aren't great at fashioning a really exciting adventure on the fly, or at very short notice. So I think you've got to do what's best for you. But I do believe previously the idea was to come with no plan and then to plan everything on the day. And I think that's part of what makes it a challenge, because everybody can spend weeks or months fashioning a finely honed adventure with, exciting subplots and, all of these little twisting, turning things in it. But to do that with very short notice, with a player group you don't know, is a skill, and is a talent. And I think that's maybe originally what the winners or the prizes were meant to be, kind of promoting this idea that those GMs who had managed to fashion something very clever and funny at short notice were to be rewarded for that, really.
I think that's part of the fun of the day, and I try my best to make sure I don't bring many ideas with me when I turn up. I might, any GM has probably a couple things up their sleeve just by default,
Of course, yeah.
But I'll try my best not to, arrive with a fully pre-written adventure and use whatever they give me. And then when I'm doing that and I'm trying to improv and stuff and looking around, and some of the other GMs, I can oh, you wrote that months ago, man. He's brought things prepared for it, and he's brought whatever maps and things. Yeah, it's luckily I don't take it very seriously. I tend to personally use Trial by Dice as a bit of a playground, and it's where I experiment with a lot of things as a GM that I might not get to do otherwise, and just kind of have a fuck about with it and just see what I can come up with. So I've not won one yet because my scores aren't ever the highest because I don't ever play to get high scores. I just play to enjoy myself and hopefully give the players a good time, and those things don't always align up with, did he stick to the rules? Well, I can tell you right now, I ain't going to stick to the rules. Do you know what I mean? I think it just depends on the day and depends on the sort of player group you get and that kind of thing. But either way, everyone always walks away smiling and happy, like you said, and I think that's just a measure of a good time.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting with D&D as well is that D&D is a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I think, especially as D&D has evolved into I'm going to go out there and say it, is more of a mainstream hobby than it ever has been. And also, to bring back to the word competitive, I think a lot of players, and obviously not all, everybody is different, but I do think there is a movement of players in Dungeons & Dragons to what we used to call min-max their characters and look at combos that make themselves very powerful in the game in order to, in brackets, win. And I think that's more prevalent than it's ever been in D&D. And I don't necessarily blame the players because I also think maybe that's the way Dungeons & Dragons is written now. I'm constantly reading articles online about this spell has been depowered and this combo is now amazing and this official subclass now allows you to combine this with this, and it's like it's doing all these things to create this formula to get this winning character, and I think that's a real shame. Only because that's not the way I want to play D&D, and I know that some people do want to play it that way. But I think it appeals to this player base who are used to creating winning combos in things like Magic the Gathering or in modern Warhammer 40k, these things where if you put X with Y, then that's going to be the most powerful thing that you can do at that moment. And there are players who will play D&D like that more than uncommonly, I think. So that's part of what gives D&D this kind of competitive mindset.
Yeah, there's lots of ways you could define competitive role-playing, isn't there? And that's one of them. If the players are competitive against the GM, then that involves them trying to get the best builds, trying to max out whatever combos they've got, and they see it as they're trying to beat the game and the system, rather than another approach that might be taken, which is a more story-based something where the GM and the players are together trying to beat the world, or however you want to do it. So I think competitive as a word is quite an umbrella term. There are lots of ways you could interpret that. I know, for example, if I had to turn up to trial and I've got a group of players who all are that type of player and they've all min-maxed their builds and they've come with the best combos and stuff, I won't have a world that is ready to accept those type of characters. They'll have no one to fight at that level. Their combos will be useless. They might as well just do something that makes them fun, and I'll try and riff off that instead of, okay, well, you've got all these combos ready to attack and defeat all these things that I've meticulously laid out with all the rules ready to accept your game-breaking attacks and whatever it might be. I don't write games like that, so I don't invite those kind of characters to be made for my games, if that makes sense.
I think also that this really highlights part of what's a major problem for modern D&D with me is that characters are so powerful. And it's really hard to kill characters in D&D, especially if you have a party. I mean, I've said this before on the show. Everything with the defensive capabilities that you have, the fact that it's, even when you drop to 0 hit points, it's so hard to actually die due to your death saves and people being able to come over and stabilize you and stuff like that. It's the rest of your party has to have a real vested interest in you dying for you to be able to die in D&D. And that's even if you get to that point. Because I believe, off the top of my head, I think it's a third level or fifth level. Third level, I think we play Trial by Dice's third level characters. By that point, I mean, all characters are monsters, like real powerful, high hit points, high damage dealing. And I think it's really gone the opposite direction with D&D. I think we now have the current threat ratings and kind of balance for the DM to create encounters is much lower than it needs to be for the party. Almost so that all of the traditional weak monsters, wolves, goblins, whatever, pose no real threat to even starting characters. So you might as well throw away all those kind of basic level monsters that would be your your meat and gravy to starting characters in many other editions. And I mean, this power creep's been coming for a while. It's come out at 3.5. It was really bad in 4, but it just hasn't slowed down at all. So we do have these really powerful characters, and then making these combos with them makes them even more deadly and throws the encounter balance out entirely. So it's got to be hard for DMs to finely tune that encounter level.
Do you think there's a competitive element from the DM standpoint? Do you think it's something that they should keep in mind when writing or prepping games for players like that? You know what I mean?
There shouldn't be. And, if you've read enough role-playing games, you would have read these words in some fashion over and over again. This is not player versus DM. You should not sit down with a role-playing game thinking, I need to beat the GM, or as the GM, I need to beat the players. Because let's be honest, you get down to brass tacks, if I'm the GM, I can say a lightning bolt comes down out of the sky and kills you. Done, I win. And that is literally it. Or I can throw a huge giant dragon at you and, destroy you in 2 minutes. So, I mean, there shouldn't be competition there because the GM should always win. But I think to step back from that, if the GM is providing encounters at the right level, and the player characters have created characters who are at the same level, then I think there is this idea of, I've beaten the GM in this encounter, and that's kind of fair. The GM's brought his arsenal, I brought mine. Mine is better because I know how to manipulate the rules of D&D in such a way that my character can beat this level 3 monster or level 4 monster, whatever it happens to be. So I think there's more and more of that in D&D. And as I've said before, I think D&D almost promotes this, and especially the slew of writers, online and who are constantly highlighting to players the new way to win. There's a real industry of these people putting these combos together for players. So this internet hive mind can tell you straight away what is the way to break the game. But then they seem to be enjoying that. So I guess, if that's how you want to play, then have at it, I guess,
Yeah, that's part of our ethos, isn't it, man? If they're playing and they're having a nice time, then what can we say about it?
Yeah. But I mean, to drag back to the idea of competitive D&D, I mean, there has been tournaments and people competing at D&D ever since the 70s. I mean, when you have these conventions and the early Gen Cons and everything, and there will be tournament-style scenarios written for all GMs to take away, or for GMs to run for multiple player groups, and you can judge the success of the player group on how far they got through the dungeon, how much gold they recovered, basically how much experience points maybe they could earn. Back in the day when it was like, this monster's worth this much experience, a gold piece is worth an experience point, defeating this thing is worth experience. And there were certain experience rewards for defeating traps and doing whatever, and there may even be a bonus for role-playing, who knows? Unlikely. And then you would see which player group has managed to, beat the dungeon the most out of the other player groups. So there's always been that idea of competing, but it's not really competing within the game. It's almost like sitting down to a video game playing Pac-Man or whatever and putting your high score into the machine. Then another player will come along who plays the same game, but then might play it better and gets to put their score in. So you're actually comparing two separate players' experiences. Progress side by side, rather than within that nucleus of player GM group. That's where the competition shouldn't be. It should be that group competing with another external group.
Yeah, you're right. I love it when you talk about video games, man. It's like hearing my dad talk about
it. I know. Well, I said Pac-Man. I couldn't think of another one. But anything you put a high score into, asteroids or something. You know what I mean? So,
there you go. Yeah, one of those new ones. One of those modern games. I did. This was years ago now, but I did down in the south of England one time take part in a 24-player D&D Mega Dungeon tournament.
Wow!
And it was 24 players, so 6 tables of 4 players,
right? Each
with a DM, and the DMs all had the same enormous map of this mega dungeon, and we all started. We found afterwards. We all started on kind of different. Imagine the dungeon is like a circle, and we all started around the edge of the circle to work our way in. So we all essentially had our own route to go, all happening in real time. And there were like referees, if you like, going around watching everyone's progress and seeing where we were all going. And if, for example, one group crossed another group's path, one of the referees would go between the two DMs and let them both know what was happening. Or if the traps had been triggered or whatever it was. So there was kind of real-time updates between the DMs on these tables. It was all in this big community hall. And our group was the one who made it into the center first. So again, you talk about competitive play. I guess speed would be one metric to measure success by, right? We got there first. That's one way to measure it. And then there was one giant boss, and every group was able to contribute towards defeating this. I think it was a dragon. Contribute towards defeating this big boss at the end through their own means. I think we had to go and find some broken artifacts that were laying around this mega dungeon or something. We all had these kind of separate goals that were all interlinked together. So all these tables, we're playing our own games with our own groups of players, but we were all existing in the same little kind of instanced world, and we're all kind of going towards the same goal. And then, funnily enough, like you said, it's hard to kill players in D&D. I remember I was playing a barbarian, and I was just trying to get this guy killed through any means necessary. I was just throwing him into like certain death whenever I could, because I just thought it'd be funny. I had a backup character ready to go. It's a one shot. Why not, right? So there'd be a crowd of, I don't know, goblins or whatever we were fighting coming down the corridor, and I'd just throw my barbarian at them and just try and give him a glorious death. And he kept winning, and I was actually actively trying to kill him. And then the last boss fight, we're going through the rounds of initiative, and my barbarian ends up going down because he was kind of taking all the damage at the front. And then we were rolling on his death saves and stuff, and it basically come down to the final death save. I made it, stood back up, and then rolled a crit on my attack, and like finished off the boss in like one move, and that was like the end of the whole thing. It was amazing. I was running around, standing up, screaming. It was great. But as an experience, then you get to go off and go and sit with the other tables and find out something about that mega dungeon that you weren't familiar with from your playthrough. But you're like, oh, you guys were over there doing that thing. Well, we were here carrying this thing around, looking for somewhere to put it or whatever it might be. So, obviously that day was kind of declared a success because we were all smiling, which is really the only metric that you need for is it good or not. But in terms of the competitive element to it, there was that kind of, who got this bit of loot that was hidden in this place? Who defeated this kind of mini-boss that was hiding in this dungeon waiting for someone to come and kill him? Or whatever it was. There was all these little things that the organisers had put in. It was a really good day, man. I kind of wish there was more stuff like that going on, to be fair, because it was a lot of fun. But my point is, there's lots of metrics for how you could measure success in a thing like that, even though we weren't directly competing against each other, because we were all, if you like, the adventurers going into the dungeon, if you like. It was still, you still could, if you chose to, judge it table versus table. There's a lot of different ways. I think because role-playing games are so broad, the competition element can be equally as broad.
I think what this makes me realise as well is I think the longevity and success of some of the well-known campaign modules or series, especially, we always talk about The Enemy Within for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which has been, reimagined. I think part of the enjoyment there is to speak to other players who have played that same scenario through, and to be like, oh, when you get to the troll, like, how did you guys like do that? Or when it comes to getting into the prison, how did you guys do that? And I think that's what's really fun, and especially when Dungeon Punks brought out the Judas Halo, I was like really excited after I'd ran it to speak to other people who'd ran it and played it, to go like, oh, well, what did you do with this bit and what did you do with that bit? And I think being able to share that experience of having gone through the same story as a player or as a GM or whatever is really cool, and there's something nice about that. And I almost wish in a way that something like Try by Dice would be, if all the GMs were given an adventure at the start of the day, given out this rough adventure guideline. Here is what you are to run today in a sealed envelope. No one's ever seen it before. And then you run it, and then everybody at lunchtime or afterwards can be like, like, we can reminisce about the same adventure even though they weren't in it with each other, which I think is really fun. And obviously you can tell the other players about what happened in your game, and that's just as much fun too. But I think in terms of if you're going to, again in brackets, put a competitive element into this, I think one of the ways that you could create that that level is to give all the DMs the same adventure, right? I mean, that I think would be fair.
Yeah, well, it depends who's competing. Our Trial by Dice as it stands, is a kind of Iron GM tournament, isn't it? It's about who's the best GM. But if you could turn it round and say, right, well, the DMs are kind of facilitating this for the players, so then it becomes more about what the players are doing, and the focus is more kind of for that element. The focus is on the players rather than the focus being on the GM being scored at the end of the day with a scorecard. It would more be about the story and the player's experience of it, and the GM is there to facilitate that. So I think it would be a different angle. But that sounds wicked, man. I hope the Dungeon Punks are taking notes.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, or you could still score the GM from running that adventure, how well they've run it, how well they present the NPCs, and obviously you would get a bare bones, you would have to flesh it out yourself and stuff. But yeah, because that, to go back to what we said before, I think there are definitely some GMs who may turn up, like yourself at Trial by Dice and have nothing planned. Although, as you quite rightly said, we all have our little bags of tricks up our sleeves, whether it's like favorite NPCs or monsters or all these anything like that, locations and stuff. That's great because that's part of your GM's arsenal, and you can reskin them for any game. But I think there are definitely some GMs who will turn up having spent a long time planning the adventure, and I think it's really hard to judge those two GMs side by side with any sort of categories. Really, it can be really difficult. So I think it's a really hard thing to put into practice. I love the idea, and we're talking about the competitive element of it, and there's probably guys at Dungeon Punks going, you're focusing on the competitive word, and you shouldn't be. It's not about that. And well, sorry guys. I mean, it is. You made it you said competition. That's why we're talking about it being a competition. We have already said how much fun it's going to be and how great you guys are. So don't worry about that. But you have made it a competition, and then that opens the door for us to discuss what competition really means.
If there's scorecards.
Yeah, because I mean, some people will be taking that a lot more seriously than other people, especially the GMs. There'll be some GMs there who want to win because that's what some people are like. And there'll be some who don't care, and that's great too. But the very fact that you say it's a competition means that people, I don't know, maybe is it a bad thing because there are going to be some people who come out of that who feel that they haven't done well? Do you think there's a danger there?
Well, as someone who has not yet won one of these things, but runs every time, I don't ever finish and feeling like, I'm gutted I didn't win that one. I don't feel that way because I'm not going there to try, and I'm not going there with a competitive mindset. It's nice to be scored on things and it's nice to do well for the players, but I'm not trying to be the best. I'm just I'm going there to enjoy the experience. But I can't speak for the other GMs. I think some of them might go and think, well, I know exactly what points I've got to hit to get 5 out of 5 on all these things by these players on my scorecard. I know that some GMs, they bring props and they bring kind of maps and miniatures and stuff, and I've never ever been a maps and miniatures style GM. It doesn't matter if it's an improv game or a written game. I never really do that anyway. So if I get a group of players who really want minis and a map, and I could run the best game ever, but there's no props on the table, maybe my players are going to be disappointed in that, whereas the table next to me might have a bunch of props and stuff that the players weren't expecting to get and would have been fine without, but that's then increased their experience of the game or decreased it. There was infinite variables and to the way that you could approach this. I think the fact that they are able to make it directly competitive at all, I think is a bit of an achievement, because there's just endless ways to approach this kind of thing, and different styles. My style of game is different to a Trial by Dice compared to a game that I've run or written somewhere else. So I wouldn't even say the same GM at Trial, really, because it's all, you've got an hour, you're scrambling around, you've got these keywords you've got to fit in, but I want to go and chat to Bordy, or I want to go and see what Connor's up to over there, but I've got to pay attention to what I'm doing. It's a whole different environment to actually your weekly sessions where you've written things and you've prepared story beats and you've prepared scenes that you want to go through and all this kind of thing. It's almost a different game, really.
I think you make a really interesting point about style as well, and I think this is what makes it really difficult to judge GMs, because, as we all know, gamers, like any group, are individuals, and we enjoy different styles of games, with different paces and tones. And if I was running a game for a group that I knew particularly well, I would run it very differently to if I was running a game for absolute strangers. Which absolutely. Which I did at the first Trial by Dice. I didn't know the guys that I sat down with, and we ended up having a great time. I mean, part of that was my social ability as a human to read the room and to understand what those kind of guys' sense of humor and sensibilities and stuff were, and I could decide where to place those dials on the gore or your maturity scales and all that kind of stuff. But I think at a tournament, you have to rein yourself in. You have to almost be the kind of tamest version of your own DMing style, because you don't know these people, and I think this stands. We've said this before when it gets into X cards and all this kind of stuff. And it'd be interesting to see if X cards go out at the table at Trial by Dice. I don't know. They certainly didn't last time, I don't think. I think maybe
I can't see them going out. But
no, and they probably would say, well, we don't need that because nobody should be upset. And it's like, oh, hang on, you don't know what's going to upset somebody, man. Do you know what I mean? Because the whole point of the X card is you might be upset by something that people didn't even realize you were going to be upset by. Mm-hmm. And it's not about discrimination and racism or prejudice or all these things, which are inherently wrong in any game, which is, we don't need an X card for that. That's wrong. Leave. Goodbye. Done. We're talking about other situations where a player may be uncomfortable with what the GM is doing, even though to a lot of us, the GM hasn't really made a mistake, because it's just a cross wires communication between two people who don't know each other. So in a tournament scenario, even though I don't like X cards, I think in the past we have said I can see their value. I can understand them as a protective tool for the players around the table, especially when they don't know each other. So that's why it'd be interesting to see if the X cards do go out, because, I mean, Dungeon Punks, if nothing else, are a group of people who are really interested in making sure everybody's okay. And that's to their credit. And, yes, you can walk in the room and see everything's going on, but I wonder whether an X card situation would be just that extra level of safety for players who may be with a GM that isn't running the game that they know it as, or whatever, and maybe hasn't been to a lot of games before. And do you think that should fall on the tournament organisers? And now I'm going to go into a wider question, not just Trial by Dice, but in general, in tournaments. Do you think the institution of X cards should be a tournament-led decision, or should it be based on a GM by GM basis in their own decisions?
Ooh. Well, I think the easy answer is there's infinite possibilities. I think the fact that it's D&D, first of all, means that we're probably less likely to see X cards than we would be at, say, World of Darkness event. I think that's a given, right?
Agreed.
I also think, in particular, for example, I'm thinking about the last Trial by Dice. There are children present. Some of them are playing.
Yeah.
So I think I said this before on an episode a while ago, but if I'm running a game at a tournament for strangers, the idea is, I guess, that I'm not going to be doing anything that might require boundaries, or I'm not going to be trying to push any boundaries. I don't require safety tools because I intend for my game to be 100% safe anyway. Having said that, you just said the X card can be used for things that you might not have thought would trigger people, or you might not assume would be something that was dangerous, for example. So there's no harm in having them at the table. I think if a tournament organizer kind of pushes those tools onto all games, I'd be happy to take it on, but I'd probably would be less inclined to kind of emphasize it. Like, right, okay, this guy said I've got to have this on the table. I didn't intend for it to be here, but if anyone wants to use it, go ahead. We've all got X cards now, Whereas if I sit down going, right, guys, this is going to be a dark horror game. I'm going to have some really serious adult themes going on, so I've made sure you've all got X cards, and I want you to feel safe, because who knows what's going to happen. It's a very different idea to me.
Yeah.
If I'm going, okay, there's going to be goblins and we'll shoot bows and arrows at them, but the tournament organizer says I've got to have these X cards here, even though we all know what a fireball is, and it's a different vibe completely. I think the fact that it's a D&D, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you're playing these fantasy games that don't tend to have these kind of themes in them. You could play it straight for a long time, really, without ever needing to come close to an X card. You can do whole campaigns that are quote unquote safe.
I think you make another an interesting point here about children being at the Try by Dice event. And I actually, the last one, ended up on a table with a kid who was a great kid. He had great fun, and it made it for a real special day that he was in my group. And we all, as players, and the GM was really great at making sure that the kid was included and had a great time. And as it happened, the kid was really switched on anyway, so he was dead keen to get involved. But there was me and another guy, I forget his name, who hadn't met before, and he had a certain idea for a character, and I play a certain way, and we were both stopping ourselves being more, kind of making more kind of, whether it's just rude jokes or actions or whatever that you might be. That's absolutely fine in an adult scenario, but we really had to, even just moderating your language. I'm not a massive swearer day to day, but I have to remember, you obviously switch a certain part of your brain when kids are around to like moderate your language, to just be a bit nicer.
Certain topics that you might not be less comfortable discussing. Absolutely.
Yeah, but just your general usage of, whatever you're going to say, oh shit, man, whatever. You don't know how old this kid is and whether he's not allowed to say shit in the house, So it definitely impacted my experience at that game, and the guy next to me who I think really wanted to play a certain way and wasn't able to because of that. It's hard for me to say, I wouldn't go so far as to say that the kid ruined our experience, because I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
But he definitely changed the tone from what it would be. He definitely had a marked effect on how that game went and how we played the game. And I think sometimes that can be hard as well, because if you are placed, at a table with people, and not just a Try by Dice, any event where it might be a group of adults and then two 12-year-olds sit down, or two 11-year-olds or whatever, that becomes a very different game by default. And it may not be the way that you normally play at home. And I think, you just man up and play nice for a day, don't you? It's just, you watch a PG rather than an 18 that day, and that's fine. But I think that those also have a massive impact on how GMs are looking at that game. And you're absolutely right, D&D is kind of safe. It's a much safer game than a lot of it. It's not like we're all sitting down to play Cult Divinity Lost. Do you know what I mean? Like, at which point, X cards, should be in everybody's pockets. But it just made me wonder, because of I'm very familiar with Dungeon Punks' ethos of, inclusivism and protection. And, I applaud them for these things continuously. And I just think that X cards really fits into that groove.
I think what you're saying is, instead of using an X card, you should just put a kid at the table, and it's a perfectly good alternative.
Yeah. I mean, that would do the trick. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So make sure there's one kid for every table, and then you never need safety tools again, because they're a little living safety tool. It'll stop you from saying anything you don't mean.
Yeah.
Okay. So what about metrics? What about measurements? What about defining success? If we're being competitive, then someone's got to win, right? So how do you win at something? I mean, not necessarily in the case of this one gaming tournament, but just generally, if you're playing wider competitive games, how do you measure something like that?
Yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? I think you have to look at it from 2 points of view. Are we judging the player's success, or are we judging the GM's success? If we're judging the player's success, then I think we have to... D&D has an inbuilt system of success called experience points. So it's really easy for us just to say which player or group of players earned the most experience points during that game would be the winner. The problem we encounter with that is the quite amorphous way in which GMs can award experience points. You are going to have GMs who are much more free with their, role-playing rewards or whatever. And you would almost have to just say, you get your XP for defeating creatures, you get your XPs for magic items, and you get your XP for hitting certain story points or whatever. If you rescue the princess from the tower, that's worth 500 experience points. If you manage to, quash the rebellion in the village, then that's worth 500 experience points. And there are various things available in the scenario that players as a group can achieve or not achieve in order to score those points. And then we get back to this old idea of, everybody in the room is playing the same module. So then we can judge one group's success against another by how many monsters they killed, how much treasure they got, which really are the essence of D&D's experience point system. And I don't think it's too radical to say out loud now that I really think D&D will change that experience point system moving forward. I think we're already seeing their reticent to just give out XP for killing creatures. I think we've already changed, because that's what it used to be. You know, you kill the troll, it's worth 750 XP, whatever it happens to be. I think D&D wants to move away from there because of how they want to judge success in the game. And I think they want to move into a much friendlier, much more less combat-orientated success system. I think is what D&D is already moving into. And I think when we see the new version of D&D, which I think is due next year, the year after, whatever it is, with D&D 5th revised or D&D 6th, whatever we want to call it, I think we'll see a marked difference in how GMs are suggested to handle experience points rewards.
I think that speaks to the players and the player group and the fan base, really, doesn't it? They're not making these decisions in isolation. They're making these decisions based off what I'm assuming is plenty of feedback.
Yeah, I mean, Dungeons & Dragons is in a great place because the player base is so huge, the demographic is so wide, it's being played in multiple countries by different age groups, and I think, you know, we live in a world where feedback can be instantaneous. So yeah, they are definitely responding to the wants and needs of the demographic as a whole, but that demographic has changed over time. I mean, I always say these things, but we live in this post-Big Bang, you know, post-Avengers movie landscape where people view D&D very differently to how they did 10, 15 years ago. And I think D&D attracts and maintains a player base that is very different than it was when I started playing D&D, for instance. Or even, you know, when I was running a game store and people were playing 3.5 and Pathfinder, it's a very different group of people who are now engaging in the hobby. And I say much wider. And it's really interesting. I want to talk about the Wild Beyond The Witchlight, which is a D&D release that came out last month. And I'll talk about it deeper later. But it's relevant at this point because we're talking about experience. There's an element in that adventure as it's written where you don't even give out experience points. You just, at certain points in the adventure, you allow the characters to level up. So you're taking that experience point system away entirely, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I've always kind of been inclined to do that. I refer to it as kind of milestone leveling up, you know, or whatever it's called. I've always kind of enjoyed that because it, in a way, it kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. You know, the players aren't worried about then they're not going to be able to hit their targets for getting a new skill or whatever. It kind of allows players, in a way, to sit back and enjoy the story and get involved in the story a bit more because they all know once they hit the next story beat, they're going to be rewarded the same. So even from the beginning, my style has always been less about points based on killing and XP for various kind of micro activities, if you like, and more that kind of style of, all right, guys, we all defeated the bad guy, or we all discovered that this is actually the next lead in the quest, or we've all finished off the episode, or even it's 10 o'clock and I'm tired and we're done for the night. You know, it doesn't have to be an in-game milestone. It could be a meta-plot milestone as well. But now is the time. You all get given the same thing. I don't know, man. That's always kind of sat right with me.
Yeah, and that's certainly a really good way to do it. And there are games that promote that style of leveling up. Many games. I mean, you know, I'm a big supporter of the Osprey line, and there are several titles in that range that suggests that you level up just based on the number of sessions you played. And that is as simple as that. So you level up straight away after one session, and after another 2 sessions, you go to level 3. After another 4, you go to level 4, whatever it happens to be. And there's a nice progression. Everybody moves up that way. I do want to tell a bit of a story about a GM that really influenced my idea of handing out experience points. And this is in World of Darkness more than D&D. But I used to have a GM when I was first getting into World of Darkness, you know, back in the 90s. And he would, after a session, and we play games very frequently, you know, every week, if not twice a week or whatever. And he would have a 5 experience point system. And, you know, I'm remembering it kind of hazy memories now, but it basically worked like there were 5 XP up for grabs at the end of each session by a player. So you would sit when the session was ended, and I think you got 1 for turning up, I think. So it was 1 XP automatic. Then you got like an experience point if you played your character well. So if you stuck to your nature and demeanors or whatever, you played your character well, you got an XP point. And then the others were like question based. So I think he would go around the room and say like, tell me something your character has learned about themselves in this session. And then you would get a point for that. And then you'd be like, tell me something your character has learned about the world because of this session. And you would get a point for that. And then there was another point for something else. I can't remember what it was. And so there were 5 points up for grabs, but you were still role-playing and flexing those creative muscles and you would be thinking about this through the session as well. You'd be thinking, oh shit, that is definitely something I've learned about the world. Werewolves are susceptible to silver. I've learned that. Or, the Sabbat are just the dark mirror of the Camarilla. Or all of these things which you could pick up from the game about the world and about yourself. I think it was just a really interesting way to hand out experience points, because you could say anything. There was no real right or wrong answer, but it forced you to kind of think about the world advancing and your character advancing at the same time, which is a really great narrative way of doing it.
That's wicked. You still got to justify your reasons for getting the experience. Yeah, I really like that, man. That's such a good way of doing it.
Yeah, and I think as we've moved on and I've got older and maybe wiser, who knows? But in terms of how to treat experience points, when you've got the right players, it's really easy just to, in between stories, go, right, what do you think you should have? What do you think? And for the player to go, right, well, I've been spending a lot of time sword training. Can I put my melee up? Yeah, of course you can. Should we say level 3? Or, no, let's do level 4. Yeah, and then chat about it. And whatever seems sensible for the players to get to just makes sense, in the narrative term. And I think that when you really trust your players and the players trust the GM, then you can get to this point where the players should be as powerful mechanically as the player wants them to be, because that's where the fun is had. I really want to be able to do, I don't know, Auspex 5, but I don't have the points for it. Tell me why you want to do Auspex 5. Oh, because it's really pertinent to my character idea. Right, well, let's do it. Let's put the points in there and have at it and go play, because that's what you're doing it for, isn't it? And I think maybe that's why, to bring this full circle, I think that's maybe why D&D, modern D&D, is so rewarding to low-level players, because they don't want to put new players off with that, what used to be the grind at the beginning, which I'm probably aware exists now in World of Warcraft and all that kind of shit. You get that button hammering thing where you've just got to do your repetitive tasks to get up to a certain point. There was that grind in D&D where you started with very few hit points, you had to kill a lot of monsters and grind your way through a few levels before you started getting the good shit. So, and I think D&D realized that this was an entry barrier to a lot of people who want to sit down with the first level player characters and kick ass. And that's why they're much more like superheroes now, above and beyond the average, man, woman, or demi-human in that particular environment. The player characters already at level 1 are standing head and shoulders above the rest of the populace, which is one way to do it. I like that start low, rags to riches idea. I like that level, but some people just want to get stuck straight in, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, you can use a rags to riches system if you like, and then just start with a higher level. There are lots of different ways of doing it.
Yeah,
it depends on what your players are after, for sure. But I think it lends itself well to being more accessible for new players. I know what you're saying. If you want to play a wizard, you don't want to just be a weakling who has got to spend years learning his first spell. You want to be able to, within the first hour or two, have cast a few sick spells and have set a goblin on fire or something cool. You want that kind of instant feedback, don't you? That's what society is these days. It's about getting stuff faster and better and quicker.
Yeah, 100%.
So I get that, and there are elements of the whole kind of grind set, if you like, that don't particularly appeal. So I understand that. But I think, again, it's about what does the GM want. There's a balance to be had between work and reward. And I think the rewards are always more meaningful if the players have put the work in to get them. There are lots of examples of this, but since we're talking about XP, I'm going to bring it back around to one of my all-time favourite systems, Zasir Karla. I'm sure I've mentioned this on a previous episode, or maybe just in conversation or whatever. But the XP system in Zasir Karla, one of the greatest mechanics within that is you will level up a particular skill if you succeed at that skill. So say you're trying to climb up a mountain and you roll a critical success or something, then you gain XP in mountain climbing and you become a mountaineer. And now you could have climbed anything before, but it was a mountain you were climbing and you succeeded at, so now you're a mountaineer. and now you can tackle crevasses and mountain cracks and fractures and different geologies, because you have literally gained the experience of that in real time, and the dice made sure that you succeeded at that, and then you advanced through the character action that you were taking at that moment, and you can watch your character's XP come onto the character sheet, and you can watch your skills advance as you're playing the game. I think it's such a brilliant way of using XP, and it's partly based on the dice, which I like as well. So it, just like real skill, it is partly luck based, and it does push you to make these rolls, because if there's a chance of getting that crit, then you know you're going to be able to level up that skill. And equally, if you fail at something, it still rewards you with XP, because failure is still a lesson, right? So you can still fail at a task, and I think you get given like general XP to spend, or I forget what the mechanic is, but having the XP tied directly into the skills and the checks that you're making is a really kind of direct feedback loop, that when the players can feel that as their characters, they can feel that it has this direct impact on the XP based on what actions they're taking. It really grounds the game in the world, and it really gives the players this sense of what they're doing matters. And I've not come across a feeling like that with any other game before or since. So for Zassikard, I really do rate that.
Yeah, there's in a very similar fashion, there's the old BRP, or basic role-playing system, which was used for RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu, Stormbringer, etc. Has a system where when you use a skill in the game, you check a box, so you tick the little box, and then any skill you've used during the session, at the end of the session, you make a skill roll, and if you fail that skill roll, it increases by a set number of percentages, like 5% Brilliant. Or whatever. And Brilliant. Obviously that becomes harder and harder the better you get to continue to improve. But you can only improve in the skills you've used during the session. So like you say, it's real time, it's real feedback. If you've fought a lot in that session, you've used your shield and your sword or whatever, those are the skills which are going to increase. If you haven't done any tracking, you're not going to get better at tracking. So, and it's a really elegant way of controlling. It's another bit of bookkeeping to do through the game, of course it is. But yeah, in terms of what you exactly said there, that feedback loop that you get from your experiences in the game versus how your character progresses makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and it really ties everything together, and you don't feel as kind of separated. I know a lot of the times, particularly, I guess, a downside of this kind of milestone leveling up that we were discussing, let's take D&D as an example, is I could play a character for X amount of time, hit X amount of milestones, and then decide, actually, you know what, I want to pick this random cool thing because it looks right, and I've got the XP to spend on it. But then as a GM, I could say, well, has your character have any experience in this? Has he ever done it before? It's like, no, but it's in the book and it looks sick and I want to do it. It's like, okay, right, but does it serve the story? Has your character really worked to deserve this, or are you just spending the skills to get it because you want to be cool? Both, neither's wrong, both are fine, but again, it's about the type of game you want to play, and having those character actions tied into the character abilities, I think, just gives it that extra level that you don't get with milestone progression.
I totally agree, and especially with Dungeons and Dragons, I think you're right, and that's what makes it more of a game rather than a real narrative system.
Yeah,
you can just when you hit a certain level and the progression chart says that you get a new power, and you pick from a couple of powers. It's like, hang on, where's this power come from? Who's granted you this power? Who's taught you this power? And there's no real discussion about what's gone on in the campaign world, but neither does there need to be for D&D. I don't think most groups don't think about it like that. They just think, oh, well, that just happens. I can now do this. Like, I couldn't before, and now, and now I can. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of kind of post D&D games, whether it's Dungeon Crawl Classics or kind of even Lamentations or whatever, takes this idea that, well, we don't really think too much about why the mechanics are the way they are because we're just playing a game, and there's that kind of disconnect from that super narrative element of it, which is baked into the system, and I think D&D unfortunately has that, and they've tried to get around that in various different ways. But I think at its core, D&D is a system which just, as we've just said, just rewards you with new powers at certain points, seemingly ambiguously. But that's just the way it is, Yeah,
it just exists for you to go into and use and whatever else, that's fine. It's cool to flick open the player's handbook and look in skills and stuff and pick the ones that are cool. I like doing that as well, but it just depends on the game you want to run, really. I'm glad that you mentioned Lamentations, because that's something that I wanted to bring up, since this discussion seems to have turned towards XP systems and the idea of competitive play. Lamentations of the Flame Princess, the experience system is geared around wealth, right? It's about, you get XP based on how much treasure you get, and that's the direct link of XP, which I think is, that's going to then turn the game its own way and create its own style of play, if that's what the GM decides to do. But how sick would it be to do a tournament, like a trial by dice style thing, where the only XP you get and the only measure of success is just how much wealth you can accrue over time, and you just let all the players loose into a city and just say who can get the richest in the next few hours, and just see what mad shit they come up with, and literally measure it based on wealth and nothing else. I just think that would be hilarious.
I think that would be great if you, as the tournament organizer, created, I don't know, a town, a valley, a situation, or a small area where you go like, right, in the mines there is X amount of gold coins, in the village there is X amount that can be had, in the inn there's this much, there are monsters here who have this, and like lay out, so say there might be 1 million gold pieces up for grabs in this one valley, in all different places that can be defeated by different ways and means. But who can grab the most of that 1 million gold crowns? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, that would be fun, because then there's a direct measure of success, isn't there? Like, do you spend that time breaking into the dwarven cemetery and able to kind of get the dwarven plate mail that can be sold for 100,000 gold coins? Or do you spend your time killing peasants in the village who have all got 2 gold pieces on them each, but if you killed 200 of them, then
yeah.
Or do you barter their money off them or whatever, anything, whatever? If you end up with the gold in your pocket at the end of the scenario that's worth an XP, I love that. I think that would be so much fun. Fuck me, I want to do that now.
Yeah, so, right.
Yeah, I think it would require a few forward planning, but yeah, that would be great, because otherwise you have a DM who just goes, oh yeah, this dragon is sitting on 1 million gold coins, and the other DM is like, oh, this dragon has nothing. He collects the bones of his enemies, which are worth nothing. So, there's got to be a standard across there. But again, to drag this back to original D&D, what you had was a very codified, laid out system of rewards for various creatures. So all creatures had a treasure type, and that treasure type was rolled randomly on a table. Normally the DM would do this either behind his screen or in front of the players. When you defeated said creature, you would go to the table of its particular treasure type, you would throw a D100 and go, right, it has X amount of this. Oh, it's got a magic item. Then you would go to the magic item table and see what it had. And then all those magic items would have an experience point value and a gold crown value. So there was this kind of semi-random way of, if you defeated a monster, even the players were on the edge of their seats seeing what treasure they would get. And it was controlled tightly, but then there was also this random element, which I think is pretty cool still.
Yeah, you've got to have a bit of both. There are dice involved. There's some element of randomness to be expected, I think, in any game because of that. I mean, there are some games where really the experience is an afterthought, because you just, especially in the modern world, I think, where a lot of us play one-shots or short campaigns, and we don't play the same characters in games for long periods of time. Some people are lucky enough to do so, but on the whole, I think we chop and change our games and characters and that quite often. So experience points, we don't spend a lot of time leveling up and stuff like that. But I think it's an important part of any game, because it's not to be overlooked, because I think players want to see advancement in their characters, and I think that's part of what appeals on a baser level, to most players. I'm nodding my head as you're saying this, because it's one of the first things that I look for if I buy a new game system. I want to go and look at the character advancement. At a glance, the rules for character advancement tell me how much longevity I'm going to get out of this game. I'm thinking about when I first opened up Troika. Beautiful book, beautiful presentation, love the artwork, love the style, very witty, got lots of good things to say about it. If you go and look at the section for character advancement, it's like half a page of nothing really. There's, increase your numbers on your skills when you level up, and that's it. Okay, well that instantly tells me that there's no point me running a long-term campaign of Troika, because all my players are going to do is get higher numbers on their skills. There's no real long-term benefits to keeping the same characters. It's designed for a one-shot. So again, and it might be a very fun one-shot, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think the sections for character advancement in games is of some of the best parts of any kind of game engine, really. I do want to very briefly, I know you mentioned Osprey Publishing earlier. Mate, I got myself a copy of Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades, and flicked through it What a fucking cool game,
Yeah,
man.
man. Very cool.
Mate. I know we covered that on the previous episode, so guys, go back and check out our Wujar role-playing episode where we covered that game. But I was looking through it, man, the skills and just the mechanics. Oh, what a game. I really do want to try and get a game of that going at some point. That's so cool.
Ruthless Blades is one of those things which proves and supports a statement and a belief that I've had for a long time, that games that are the most successful have the mechanics that are created from scratch to suit the very style, nature, and tone of the game that they're meant to support. And it's one of these things where you kind of just take an engine and, you know, everything has to be powered by the apocalypse or use the fate system or whatever it happens to be. It's like if something has been designed from the ground up to mechanically feel the way it's meant to, Ruthless Blades is a classic example of that. It's so stylish, it's so slick, it's a very clever game, very well written, amazing.
You want the mechanics to line up perfectly with the story and what's going on, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just brilliant. It's like one of my favorite books to just open and read. You know, it's just a treat to read through. There's so much cool stuff in there, and the skills and the sort of characters you can build and everything. Like, so, you know, that would be a game I'll be very excited to be moving through a world, and I'll be thinking about the XP I can get or the leveling up I can do, because I've got in my head, I really want to get this next skill. I really want to be able to do this thing. You know, you can, like, one of the skills is like you can basically teleport around a room and just leave a puff of smoke behind you, and it's like, as long as no one's looking at you directly, you can move around, and if someone's looking at you, then you can't. But as soon as they turn their back, you can just go poof and just disappear. Oh, what? That's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, there's a lot to be admired in that book for sure. Actually, we're at the time of recording this episode, we're only a couple of weeks away from the new Osprey release, so I'll be right on that on the release date. We've got the Heirs of the Templars, which is due out on the 22nd of October. So I'll definitely be picking that up when that comes out.
Is that a new standalone or an expansion for something?
No, that's a new game. Yeah, that's funnily enough, there's only been all of the Osprey RPG titles have been standalone, apart from the Fall of the Children of Bronze, which is the Jackals expansion. So Jackals is the only game that has spawned a second book. The rest of them are all standalone, and then this comes another Templar based game, which I'm sure will be full of interesting, 13th, 14th century occult, religious, cool stuff. So look forward to that.
Up our street, anyway.
Yeah, I love that.
I mean, if there's one thing I want, it's a complete collection of the Osprey RPGs.
Yeah, I mean, I reached the point where, I picked up the first couple, and now I'm in a situation where I'm just getting them as soon as they come out in order to try to keep on top of it. And what I do love about it is that they're priced so well. And they're very friendly to the buyer, and they're very great quality. I think I've said this before, but I'll say it briefly again. Because of Osprey's position in the market and how kind of solid they are as a company, they can afford just to go ahead and print a really beautiful book and just put it on the shelf, and for people to get it. And I really applaud them for that, because I'm the first one to kind of knock Kickstarters and big companies using Kickstarter when they don't need to. Osprey are really doing everything that I admire by just putting the faith behind the writers and the content, and just producing a wonderful book at a really good retail price. That is just also has really good content, and I think they are just one of the real trailblazers in the RPG industry over the last couple of years. I just really admire what they're doing.
Yeah, that's it as well, isn't it? On top of everything else, it's also that they're making good games.
Yeah.
So as well as the rest of it, and the production value and everything else, and the good writing, they are actually mechanically sound and fun to play. So it's they're onto a winner, whatever they're doing. So, I think we're getting a bit off topic, but we could do a whole episode about the Osprey stuff, couldn't we?
Oh, and no doubt I'll mention it as soon as, probably next episode, or whenever it happens to be, when that new book drops. I'll definitely bring that onto the show and talk about it.
Yeah, do us a double feature with Fall of the Children of Bronze as well, because.
Right, yeah. I wasn't sure whether we talked about that on the show, but maybe not. Yeah, that's a good one.
The list is endless, isn't it? The list is endless.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. You got anything else to say about competitive gaming?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. So I think to say anything else would probably just be going over old ground. And I think it is worth putting at the end that I think role playing is all about making sure that everybody around the table is having a good time. So And that works two ways. We've done these how to be a better player episodes, how to be a better GM episodes. If you're a GM, look to your players' needs and wants. If you're a player, look to your GM's needs and wants and the other players. The responsibility falls on everybody's shoulders. A group is only as strong as its weakest member. So, help the GM, especially you don't know how many games they've ran or, how well they know the scenario or whatever. And there's tons of ways to be a better player alongside to support your other players and support your GM. So it's not us versus them. It's not GM versus player. It really should never be like that. It should be about getting the most fun, but also for me, the best story out of it that you can, that will stick in your mind, that you can retell the events of that story to other players or other people, and they will go, oh man, that sounds so cool. And if that is what you've got out of any scenario, out of any game, then I think we can consider ourselves winning.
That is a brilliant segue to the next thing that I want to talk about, so thank you for rounding off that discussion there. I know we want to discuss Wild Beyond The Witchlight, and probably in the context of this episode is probably a great feature as well. So we'll talk about that at length shortly. But I do want to discuss a game that I have finished playing recently, especially with the kind of story elements in mind. Is it a game that has a strong narrative and has left everyone coming away feeling happy? Well, I hope so in this case. I've just finished season 1 of a Cypher campaign that I was running, and having now wrapped it up to a conclusion, I feel like I'm able to discuss it, at least briefly. I can kind of see the bigger picture of season 1. So the Cypher system we discussed on previous episodes. It's a very story-driven system. It does use XP milestones, I think, to a certain extent. So XP tends to be doled out at the end of episodes. You also have XP to use in the sessions as a kind of currency to buy story beats with. So the players can use their XP and spend their XP to influence the story in minor ways, which I think is a really good way to make sure that XP remains involved and that makes sure XP is at the front of players' minds. So if you've just listened to the past hour and you like the idea of emphasizing XP in your games, then check out the Cypher system, because I champion that rulebook. It's a really good game engine. This campaign that I've just finished, me and you, Jamie, one time we were strolling around and doing our thought experiments as we do, trying to come up with different kinds of mad little worlds or settings that we could put together that might make a fun game to run. And I think we come up with some pretty mad ones, like, what was it, Underwater Wild West, or
Tsarist Russian Cosmic Horror.
Tsarist Russian Cosmic Horror, exactly, yeah. Trademark, by the way. If you see anyone doing Tsarist Russian Cosmic Horror, that was definitely our idea. Yeah. And one of the ones I've always wanted to do for a long, long time, I'm talking before I was even a DM, is a fantasy whaling campaign. And it was one of the things that come up in that conversation. We were both laughing about how cool it would be, and I think we both had some ideas for it. And, even at the time, I didn't really think that I'd ever get around to doing it. And then just opportunity arose, and I had the time to put in. And I decided, man, actually, I have space in my life at the moment where I can run a fantasy whaling adventure. So I've got myself a group of players, curated players who I love very much, and put a story together. And off we went, and we just wrapped up season 1, and it was bloody brilliant. And I just wanted to share a little bit about it here on the pod, because it was just an absolute blast to play. First of all, shouts out to my players. If you have listened to Realm of Fire over on the Full Metal RPG area, the Full Metal RPG team, if you like, you'll know the host over there, Rob. Rob was one of my players, a fantastic role player. Shout outs also to the entity known only as Cackling Hexwraith. If you're an Instagram guy, you will probably have come across Cackling Hexwraith's feed. There's a lot of great stuff on there. I managed to get the entity involved. Great player again. So shout outs. And also a friend of the show, Jack Collister Brown, who is just a living legend in his own right. Do check out his Insta for cool art and stuff. So I wanted a group of players that I knew were going to be right for the game. You know, as we've said in the past, it depends on your players as well. So I knew the sort of game that I wanted to play, and then it was up to me to kind of curate that experience and make sure that the players were a good fit. And that's one thing I know for a fact I succeeded on, because they were all great players in their own right, and we all brought something to the table. You know, our interests kind of aligned with this thing. But in terms of the campaign, I got to draw on a lot of influences and things that I really like, things that I am a fan of over the years. I know we had some questions on the Instagram about what sort of books and things can you draw from as inspiration for games and that kind of thing, right? You know, you've done your Instagram polls and stuff. And this was one of those campaigns where I had a huge pile of books on my desk that I just rifle through for inspiration. Notably among them, obviously, Herman Melville's Moby Dick, one of my all-time favourite books. I have a couple copies of it, so I made sure to use my well-leafed copy, and I left my Reader's Digest hardback where it belongs. I also used Patrick O'Brien's Master and Commander. I didn't have time to read all 20 books in the series, but if you haven't even read the first Master and Commander and you're into that kind of naval setting, I can't recommend that enough. Just the level of detail and the historical accuracy in those books is just incredible. So, you know, I got to use these real important touchstones, at least for me culturally, and along with soundtracks that I put together. There's a lot of heavy metal. I'm a big Mastodon guy, and their 2004 album Leviathan was super influential for me back in the days when I'd be playing Need for Speed Underground 2 and listening to metal. So, you know, I was basically, it's kind of a culmination of a lot of my interests I got to put together into this campaign to run for this amazing group of players, and it was just a absolute resounding success. It was really story based, so we really made sure that what was coming first was the narrative. The Cypher system has a inbuilt section in the character creation where it gives each character their own story arc. So as well as the main story that I was trying to write, I also had these 3 sub-stories, these 3 subplots. Each character had their own arc they were trying to resolve, and I managed to kind of use those to direct and ultimately influence where the main story was headed in order for the characters to gain their own resolutions. It was just brilliant, man. It was just such good fun to run, and the players had a blast. I think it was a combination of the fact that we're playing in this mad setting that we'd all kind of come up with. It was a post-apocalyptic fantasy water world where people subsisted on hunting the creatures that lived on this kind of ocean planet. That combined with the game engine, this kind of emphasis on story, how the XP is used within the sessions and after the sessions to drive the story forward and to advance the characters. As well, the way the Cypher system works in terms of the dice rolls and in terms of the conflict resolution, it all just come together. It was absolutely just a really complete singularity of a game, and I'm really happy that I got the chance and the time to put it together. You know, I made a world map, so as the characters would sail around the seas, I would put little dotted lines based on where the ship had been going, you know, and they'd sail to different locations that I'd prepared or semi-prepared, and we were able to have this kind of adventure on the high seas. Basically, it was just an absolutely wicked game. So I just thought it'd be worth mentioning for you guys. If you want to play in a fantasy whaling water world campaign, then hit me up. I've got a lot of resources and maps and stuff prepared for it.
I think at this point it might be worth just to highlight the Cypher system a little bit better. You should tell us more about this. What are ciphers in the game? Because obviously they're massively important. They're in the title of the game. What are ciphers, and how did you utilize the concept of ciphers in this fantasy whirling game?
Cool. Okay. I suppose this could be another metric for success, isn't it? Competitive-wise, I'm not sure. But so the Cypher system is very broad. It can be any setting that you'd like. It could be superheroes. It could be historical, fantasy, sci-fi. It's designed to be anything. So don't picture a certain setting in your head. Just have any kind. Just have a game, I guess, in your head. But the idea of a cipher is that it's a artifact or an item or a magic item or a thing, or maybe it's intangible, that a character can possess, and when they use or activate the cipher, it has a big effect that is a one-off. So it could be a handheld item that maybe as a teleporter, or it could be like a mind reading device, or it could be a type of grenade or a bomb. Or it could even be like a blessing from a god, and when you activate the blessing, it gives you luck. It could be anything. It's just a thing as a Cypher, and upon activating it, changes the course of the scene, or the game, or the combat round, or the conflict that you're in, or the obstacle, or whatever. The idea behind it, in terms of the rulebook, is that the characters have more options for how to approach problems. You can give them these ciphers, or they can find these ciphers, or in some case go hunting for them, or however you want to include them in the world. Obviously, I'll get to that in a second. And once they have this array of ciphers, there is a limit to how many you can carry at once. They're able to approach problems in different ways. They're able to navigate obstacles in a way that maybe their character and their skills alone wouldn't allow. It gives them another angle to look at problems with, and once you use the cipher, it's then discarded completely. Maybe you get another one, maybe you don't have any for a bit, maybe they're used as rewards by the GM. It's a kind of, it allows these cool moments to happen. Maybe one of them is just an EMP or a huge explosion, like a nuclear bomb. It's a cipher or something. It's a one-off. You only get to use it once, but you have access to it, and you can possess it, and then you can go and activate it, and then it will change the course of the story. So there are lots of different ways that ciphers can be used. And I think the idea is to just kind of keep the game on its toes, and to keep things rolling smoothly and not have things stagnate. If you've only got certain skills that you've used over and over again, you get different ciphers that will help you through in ways that your skills wouldn't. Now, in terms of this campaign that I've just finished, I know we had the idea that, what was it? You said ciphers could be called Jonahs, and they'd wash up in the bellies of the whales that you'd be hunting at sea, right? Because it's I did like a post-apocalyptic fantasy waterworld type thing. The idea is that you're on this ocean planet, but under the waters is this drowned civilization, and all these things are washing up from this future civilization up to the surface that are then picked off by the current humans or the current civilization that live on the surface of the water like pond scum. And you're kind of always scavenging. The sea gives things to you, and it's just up to you how you use them. So, we had some things that were buried in the bodies of sea monsters. We had there was a particularly great scene where it was a whole episode actually, really, where the players had to dive down to the ocean floor and recover this kind of radioactive artifact, and they had a big diving suit that was really archaic, and I had loads of gauges and meters in the diving suit that would read different things at different times to increase the tension in the scene and whatever else. So that was really fun to do. So there's lots of different ways that they could acquire these ciphers, and then it was really up to them how they'd use them. One cipher I had was like an anti-gravity thing, and it's like a handle basically, and you attach the handle to anything you want, and it makes that item completely ignore air resistance and gravity, so you can just push it around as if it's in space, and it will just float forever. And obviously then you apply a lot of inertia to that object, and it will keep moving at the same speed, so you can use it as like a spear or a harpoon, or throw something and it will travel for eternity, or whatever you wanted to do with it. So you give these toys to the players, and you let them use the toys however they want. And I think that's part of the fun, is that it's a kind of guaranteed one-off item that you can let them loose with and see what happens with it.
Yeah, I've always found the idea of ciphers as a kind of mechanical and narrative tool to be like amazing. And because the cipher system is, as you quite rightly say, a kind of generic system, you can imagine ciphers in a superhero game being like special kit, or in a fantasy game they're magic weapons. In a a horror game they could be cursed items. Like all of these, it can be anything, which is so amazing because it's just a wide variety of what ciphers can be. But I think it's right that it's called the cipher system, because I think they are the real kind of cornerstone of the game and what makes it really different. Monty Cook's a genius, man.
Oh mate, yeah. I still think it's one of the best things he's ever done, and I'm a big fan of Planescape. But it's so far been one of the best games I've ever written and ran, and I can hand on my heart say that it was a lot of fun. The players made it what it was, but the writing and stuff that I put into it, the Cypher system really kind of enabled me to get the most out of it. So yeah, very grateful, very happy that I managed to round it off to a finale.
I think for people who are listening and think the Cypher system is worth giving it a go, it is. It doesn't come with a preset campaign world. There are books that you can buy to kind of add on to the game. So if you're the kind of GM who wants a world, you want that work done ahead of time, I can definitely recommend Numenera, which was the first Cypher system game. So it came out before the generic Cypher system rulebook. And I think Numenera was really, as we just said before about Ruthless Blades, it's one of these things where the system and the game were written hand in hand. Numenera, we're not going to get into it massively now, but it exists on Earth millions and millions of years in the future. And there has been the rise and fall of various civilizations over that time. And the things that are lying around from these civilizations are ciphers. So and that's what makes Numenera really interesting. So for people who love this idea of these ciphers and want something a bit zany in a very Gene Wolfe kind of Jack Vance Dying Earth sort of way, then you could do a lot worse than go and pick up Numenera.
It's a brilliant book, it really is. I do recommend it. And if you're more of the gaming type as well, check out the Planescape Torment spiritual sequel, which they released on PC a few years ago, which is just a great CRPG for you to run through. That's a lot of fun as well. And it uses the Cypher system, just like the tabletop version.
Cool.
Yeah, recommend. Anyway, it was a great campaign. I had a lot of fun. I could talk you through the entire story in detail, but maybe that's something if you want to come and collar me at Trial by Dice next month and ask me about it. I'll be happy to run you through. But yeah, just thank you to Rob from Realm of Fire. Thank you to JCB. Love you very much, bruv. Thank you to Kathleen Hexray. For the three of you just made that game what it was and really brought the whole thing to life. And it was just a pleasure to have the time and the opportunity to put something like that together because it was a real epic. And it's a rare thing to run a campaign start to finish. I think it was like 12 or 13 weeks, and we actually pulled it off. It's an achievement in itself these days,
Oh yeah, I mean, playing anything for that long. I mean, if you're in a group that's been playing, week on week for a long time like that, then count yourself lucky. You're doing it right. It's great, especially in the modern world where people have a lot of stuff going on. It's great to be able to play anything for that length of time. It's really cool.
Absolutely, yeah. So one thing the Cypher system does well is reward XP based on activities that aren't necessarily combat and fighting. With that in mind, would you like to run us through Wild Beyond The Witchlight, which we mentioned earlier on in the episode, which I think is gearing more and more towards that style of play? Am I right in saying it's kind of Wizards of the Coast's first foray into this kind of being aware of this style of gameplay?
Okay, so I think D&D have been moving in this direction for a while. I think, in various supplements we've seen a move towards the idea that the adventures can be completed without combat is kind of there in the background. I think Wild Beyond the Witchlight is the first book that really wears this badge on its sleeve, and that really kind of suggests at the beginning in writing that you could play through this entire thing without any combat. It might be hard. You'd have to have quick thinking players, etc. But it's very possible, and I think that's really interesting from an industry standpoint. That not that is implied, but that is stated. I think that's very different. When I first picked up Wild Beyond the Witchlight, I'm not the biggest fan of D&D's new incarnation, and I'm not the biggest fan of a lot of the books that have been coming out for the game. So I'm gonna say that first. It's not my favorite game, so I was inclined to probably not enjoy this book when I picked it up. However, there's much to be appreciated inside Wild Beyond the Witchlight. There's some great ideas in here. Personally, I don't like the way that it's presented, and I'm going to get into telling you why.
Please.
So, the spoilers up ahead. So if you want to play Wild Beyond the Witchlight and you don't want any kind of spoilers, generic spoilers, then you might want to kind of switch off from this episode, because I will be talking about the kind of the adventure itself and the setup and stuff. This to me feels like the PCs should be playing children. So this, to me, feels like this kind of...
kids on bikes type thing,
really does have that kids on bikes kind of feel about it.
Okay.
Now, whether that is intentional or whether that is just kind of taken from a lot of what's going on in the game industry right now, I don't know. But it's fairy-based, so it's one of the first and major books in the new D&D line to really get into the D&D's version of fairy, so to speak. It also has other connections to books that have previously existed, and I think this is really interesting to see that D&D are tying some of their products together to create a wider kind of patchwork of things that link into each other. You might recognize NPCs or various events or places or whatever crop up in different books. That in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It tends to lead into the idea that you might want to buy something else so that you can see its connection to another book, which I can totally see as a marketing strategy. But the major element of Wild Beyond the Witchlight is the Witchlight Carnival. So the Witchlight Carnival itself is a traveling fair that moves around the multiverse and just pops onto different planes and just turns up and sets up as this kind of, imagine if you will, a fun theme park with all of the requisite rides and events and things like that. I mean, yeah, it's straight away,
Okay.
it's very whimsical. It's very, it really had the opportunity to be this kind of carnival, traveling freak show idea, which would have been really interesting.
Yeah, give me some freaks, man. Where are the freaks at?
Yeah, but I mean, this is really, imagine a kind of kids' nursery idea of a carnival with, like, you know, I mean, the caravans themselves, like, come down on, like, butterfly wings and, like, you know, change the environment and, like, put trees around it, and, you know, it's run by these two elves, you know. It's straight away, it gets into the idea that this is really, it looks like it's played for laughs. It's cutesy, it's whimsical. There's no real danger there in the carnival. It's just to be had. There's loads that you can do, but none of it's combat orientated or conflict orientated or anything like that. The carnival allows the player characters to jump into this realm, this fairy realm of which the kind of main person who runs this realm is trapped, and the rest of the scenario really involves the characters moving around parts of this fairyland in order to free the leader of this realm from their imprisonment. Hither, Thither, and Yon are the three names of the environments in which the characters will move around. And each one has a particular theme. There are lots of, you imagine, all the fairy stuff here. I mean, this is a mixture of, like, Labyrinth and kind of Alice in Wonderland, and it's got all that kind of stuff in it. You know, there are cute Displacer Beast kittens and, you know, scarecrows with pumpkin heads and all sorts of fun, interesting, cutesy stuff can be found in here. I mean, you know, there is in the carnival, I think it's a centaur called Cloppington. I mean, this is really what we're getting into. You know, there's a lot going on here. But it's so sweet. It's so sickly sweet, the entire book, that I would struggle to understand how to run it. It feels like I should be running it for 10-year-olds. I mean, that's what it really feels. That's what it feels like it's directed towards. But then it's not, because it's quite involved. The you know, some of the interesting characters and locations have obviously been well thought out and are detailed. But the premise for the adventure itself, that you are just hired by this old warlock, he'll give you some stuff if you go and free this person from the fairy realm, is so thin on the ground. I mean, it's begging for characters just to go, why should we do this?
Right. I was going to ask about the hook. What's the in?
There are two hooks that can be used. One is that as a child you you lost something at the carnival, and now you return to the carnival in order to find the thing that was lost. Which is a kind of cool fairy tale kind of in. And the other one is
right.
a really, it might as well be a man walks up to you in a tavern and gives you a treasure map. I mean, that is essentially what it is. Really lazy hook for such a brand new and kind of what could have been an interesting game. And it's almost as if D&D is saying, look, it doesn't matter why you're doing this mission, why you're doing this adventure, just crack on with it. And that in a way is really interesting, that D&D are then kind of borrowing from this Lamentations and Dungeon Crawl Classics idea of it doesn't matter why you're on this adventure. Just the adventure that matters. It matters to me, and I've worked really hard at some of the D&D games that I've ran from the 5th edition to make the players care about the adventures that we're on, because even at the beginning with, Tyranny of Dragons and some other ones, it's really hard for those original hooks to get the player characters to care. I've had to do a lot of work and a lot of sessions before I've even ran the start of the adventure. And I feel like I would have to rework the hook in this massively if I was going to get player characters involved in it. So from that point of view, it's a letdown story-wise. But then just everything you come across in this is just played for cute giggles. And it's hard because, as I've said, there are some interesting things in here. But it's the presentation. It's the idea that your characters are going to want to be nice to everybody and to treat everybody lovely and to be these almost like innocent, childish, do-gooder heroes. Now, I don't understand how a group of, chaotically minded, murder hobo NPCs would get through this book. Because it's not written for them at all. There's almost nothing in there to be done. I mean, you can tromps around the fairy realm just slaughtering things, but you won't get much enjoyment out of that afterwards, and you certainly won't progress through the plot. So yeah, it's I find it interesting that D&D have brought out this book, and it really pushes the non-conflict, cutesy, super no X card needed agenda.
That's what we're calling it now, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is an indicator of where Dungeons and Dragons is going. I really do think this is, and it's not just an indicator of where Dungeons and Dragons is going. I think it's an indicator of where the mainstream RPG industry is going. And I use the word mainstream because I know there are lots of indie creators doing, dark, mature stuff, whether it's Morkborg that's become very popular right now, or, Mothership, and all of these really cool games that are out there that certainly don't pull any punches and are, horror or action or blood and gore. Mainstream seems to be going in this direction. And it's really super safe. It's super nothing that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the kind of its elements of diversity and inclusivism and everything are, I clap my hands at them, and that's great. But it's the way that it's done and the way that it's presented is very childish, and I think it almost belittles the work that they're doing with being so clever and being so mindful of diversity and inclusivism that they have to turn it almost into a joke, and that's what I think's a shame.
Right. I'm trying to think about. Right, you got me thinking now about, we mentioned 5th revised or 6th edition or whatever it might be. I'm certain that's going to have some big changes to the character class builds and the character creation section at large. I'm sure in the new D&D book is just going to be completely different, because this has got me thinking about this Witchlight Carnival thing. You know how we've got some previous D&D expansions, like you come across, Curse of Strahd, and, the players can be transported to that realm and then they've got to fight their way out. Or you might have something where the players come across the environment and then they get stuck into the quest or whatever it is. I'm trying to think about, you have an existing player group, let's say level 4 or level 6 or whatever it is, of D&D adventurers who come across this Witchlight Carnival. I can see, even in character, them taking it as a joke. You come to this carnival and, right, who's in the adventuring party? Well, we've got a thief. What does he do? He steals stuff. Okay, cool. We've got a sorcerer. What does he do? Well, he sources stuff. Okay, cool. We've got a fighter. What does a fighter do? Well, it's kind of in the name. I'm only really good at one thing, and that's fighting shit. That's what I'm called, fighter. So I'm going to try and find stuff to kill here, right? You know, and you've got all these like sweet elves and butterfly caravans and stuff, and the fighter literally from the ground up is designed to only do the one thing that it can't do. So I feel like the existing player group or adventuring party, if you like, even in D&D 5th, encountering this would kind of stumble over it, right? Would kind of trip on it.
Yeah, I think what you've hit on here is a major issue that Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast are going to have to carefully look at. The fact that the character classes are, as you quite rightly said, at least two of them are geared towards doing two things that D&D seems to suggest you shouldn't be doing: fighting and stealing. Like, you know, you've got assassins and like all this kind of stuff, and I just don't. Yeah, I don't get what group of player characters are going to enjoy this this kind of scenario, because there's nothing to be done in the carnival. I mean, there's nothing to be done. You can go on racing snails. You can go on racing snails. There is pages and pages of all of the cool little games that you can play inside the carnival. None of them mean anything.
So it's all side quests almost, or mini games.
Just tiny little mini games that you can play and just experience. And I mean, I can't imagine sitting at a table running them. I can't imagine enjoying them. But then I think this isn't for me. You know, this isn't directed to me.
No, you don't say.
No. But I mean, even for D&D, this is a step in a really interesting direction.
Does it have any extra stuff for players to use? Has it got any more character classes, and has it got any races?
Yeah, it's got a couple of races.
Okay, right.
Yeah. Well, one is a pixie.
Love it. Love a pixie.
Yeah. And one is a Herongon, which I assume is meant to be pronounced Herongon, which is a rabbit creature, basically, like imagine a Bucky O'Hare style. Yeah. So
that's really lazy.
Sorry, not a pixie, a fairy. So you can be fairies, which are literally, you know, small guys with butterfly-style wings and all that nonsense. And
that's sick, though, mate. I love a fairy. I love the idea of playing a fairy. That's kind of cool. You can do a lot with that. Maybe not in the Witchlight. You know, maybe you have to take it somewhere else. But you know, I'm thinking about. Do you remember Volo's Guide to Monsters? That had some cool shit in it. That book did, man. You had like crow people and all kinds of bonkers stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's some Kenku in here. You know, there's some crow people and stuff in here. Yeah, but it's just, you know, Diana Cloppington, the centaur, and, you know, a tiefling fire breather entertains the crowd in the big top, and just like absolute nonsense. It's not great stuff. And the Herongons just there. There's no real description of their society or how they function into anything else. And I think D&D's in this danger now of just going, here's a race. Feel free to use this. Now this is an official race. Use this anywhere. So you've got people turning up for Baldur's Gate fucking game and just go, I'm going to play a Herongon because it's in Witchlight and these are my skills, and I'm a rabbit guy now, and that's it.
Right.
So, you know, guess the number of feathers on the basilisk and all this kind of stuff. And it's just, one of the things that I really hate in this actually is it introduces as this massive Deus Machina in the game. There's Eliwick Tumblestrum is a bard, I believe she's a gnome bard, that turns up and basically helps the characters whenever they're in trouble. Basically breaks the game for them. So we'll pushes them in the right. She's the one who originally gets them tickets for the carnival. She's the one that will turn up and push them in the right direction, just as if by magic, just turn up and then defeat. And D&D have gone so far as to not give any stat block for her because she can't be fought and she can't be defeated. So there is no way. As it says, no stat block for Tumblestrum is necessary, since she won't harm or hinder the characters and cannot be harmed by them. Now, I mean, that is just a sweeping statement that takes all control from the GM and the players. Oh, this Tumblestrum, this gnome bard's doing my head in. Fighter says I'm going to cut her head off. You can't.
Kill Jester.
Why can't you? You just can't. That's it. And to make things worse, people who play Magic may have already spotted this. Eliwick Tumblestrum is a planeswalker. which in Magic terms means one of their big character style things from one of their sets. She must have
Magic the Gathering.
Magic the Gathering, yeah.
It?
So she is known as a planeswalker, a fiercely independent and extremely powerful entity not to be trifled with. And she's basically this huge plot device hammer that is just used to knock the plot back onto the rails whenever you need to. And the fact that it says she cannot be harmed by the players and she will not harm the players is, to me, that's just the removal of agency is awful. And that's what this book's full of. This real, like, you will not deviate from this. This is what we're going to do here, and there's no choice.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of insulting, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah.
But that also makes me wonder. They need an NPC to keep the story on track, because the story might get derailed by what? By all the mini games that is in the same book.
I think they want you to go, this is the mission you need to go and do, just go and do it. And any time that you struggle with this, we want you to succeed. So we have put this planeswalker into the game that if you get lost or get off track or whatever, I can just have her turn up and put you back on track. Almost like this kind of Greek chorus style device that's baked into the adventure to make sure that you will succeed. And it's just really odd. And I'm thinking, like, well, if she's this powerful that she can't be harmed, and she's supporting the characters to go and free this individual, why doesn't she just go and do it?
Yeah, she can do it. Yeah, man weighs eagles, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just, well, I mean, we could get into that, and there's a reason that
Let's not. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's main reasons why you can't just fly the ring and over, Oradru.
I'm sorry, mate. I'm sorry to bring that up. I know it's a sensitive point for you.
It's going to upset me. But anyway, yeah, I mean, in terms of this D&D game, it's really brutally simplistic, and it really promotes an agenda that I see more and more in Dungeons and Dragons and other mainstream role-playing games. And it is interesting to think what massive changes we're going to see in the new edition with regards to conflict and combat and stuff like this. I mean, I've said, many, many months ago on the show, we were talking about, the idea of X-carding combat and stuff like this, and people not wanting to play conflict inside their role-playing games. And, I'm sure we'll talk about it more maybe when we've both read it, but there's a new game out called Wander Home.
I'm interested in that. Yes.
Yeah.
It looks pretty good.
It looks great, but the game is designed that it has no physical confrontation in it, which is not wrong per se, but it's designed that way. So when you sit down to play, you're not expecting it, which I think is a much better way to do it. Whereas I think people playing Dungeons and Dragons are by their very nature, because you're playing somebody who fights, you've got a sword. The magic items are one of the things that are desirable in the game in order that you can do more damage and take more damage, right? I mean, that is the sole purpose of a lot of the famous magic weapons and armor in D&D, is order to increase your combat effectiveness. And I think D&D is really going to struggle to move away from that and to provide sensible alternatives. I think it almost wants to turn itself into something it isn't. And this book is the turning point, I think, for D&D. And I think we'll look back in the future and see, well, Wild Beyond the Witchlight, that's where it changed. That's where D&D became this new version of what we perceive it to be, this very safe, non-combat oriented, fun, cutesy Saturday morning cartoon thing. Whereas it used to be dungeon bashing and killing monsters and getting XP because you've murdered them. And like I said before, and then when we're talking about, leveling up and stuff, it's almost glossed over in this. It's just like every time the PCs, there are 3 different realms to explore as part of this fairy world. And each time you enter the gate into one, you just level up.
Of course you do.
Yeah, you just level up. Just level up, pick your new stuff, and then you go on to the next one. You level up and you level up. So you can level up 4 times within the adventure. Done. You know what I mean? And that's it. So by the time you hit the end level boss or whatever, you are the correct level.
Right. I'm really thinking now about how fundamental combat is to the earlier editions of D&D, and just how big of a change they're going to make if this is the direction they're going in. I could pull my player's handbook down now and open it to any page, and there'd be something that they'd have to revise if they're trying to go for a kind of less combat-heavy alternative. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Almost the entire of the player's handbook is devoted to building a character that can kick ass in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
But to speak on a bigger point, I'm quite disappointed about this because I'll be honest, I was kind of cautiously optimistic for it. Maybe I voiced this on a previous episode when I heard that. Oh, and actually, when you told me that D&D were doing a book that was specifically kind of trying to gear away from combat and was trying to have these alternative conflict resolutions, I was quite excited. I was wondering, they've got a big team of writers, they've got a lot of production value behind it. What sort of thing are they going to come up with to get around this kind of central focus, particularly with D&D in mind, central focus of combat? For example, I've always wanted to play a game that is set in some court, a game of political intrigue, or a game where you are, corporate saboteurs. There's so many adult ways, or mature ways, if you like, or grown-up ways, I guess, to run a game that doesn't have any combat in it. Imagine a game of you're a world leader and you've got to manage your economy and stuff like that, or that kind of resource management style, or something a bit more down to earth where you're maybe intelligence gathering, or there's loads of ways and loads of games and loads of different types of stories that you can run that don't necessarily have combat in them. And I was really excited to see their first kind of offering, and they, where are they going to set the bar? What sort of style are they going to bring to the table? Where they're going to say, look, this is still us. We're still Wizards of the Coast. We're still D&D. We've got all this rich history behind us. Here's what we have made for you that doesn't need combat. I'm sure we could go back through the history of D&D and take enough things out of there to come up with a game that doesn't have combat in it, and it can still be kind of fundamentally Dungeons and Dragons, if you like. And I don't think this is it.
Yeah, I think D&D seem to model themselves on like three pillars of adventuring. One is kind of combat, one is exploration, and one is social. And you're absolutely right. One of the things I would have suggested straight off the bat was to produce some sort of really complex political court guild type thing. And I mean, the Ravnica book's got a little bit of that in it, but it doesn't really push it far enough, I think.
Was the Ravnica, was that Eberron?
No, Ravnica was a set that existed for Magic the Gathering, and they turned it into the first full hardback setting that had ever gone from Magic into D&D.
That passed me by.
Yeah, that was it's a really interesting like big city with loads of different guilds in. So it's got this idea of guilds in fighting and political sort of stuff. The book itself is fairly interesting, but it's hard to really enjoy it massively because Wizards are basically just saying, look, here's our license from the Magic the Gathering, we're just going to put it into our D&D. And the fact that they put a Planeswalker character from the Magic the Gathering game into this D&D book just like ruins it for me more than already it was. But it's going to be interesting to see how Dungeons and Dragons pushes forward this idea of non-combat. Yeah, there's no other way to say
what
it.
Do we call it?
Because they are definitely doing this. So
a bit of a stumble at the start line, I think.
Yeah, it's just so much work would need to be done for me to want to play this. That I might as well have written it from scratch. I would have to change the names of a lot of things, and even I would have to come up with a better setup. Even the idea of the carnival itself is never really explained. About what are people frightened of it, or do they know it comes? Like, it just turns up in the sky, transforms the landscape, literally transforms the landscape, sets up a river around itself, puts up some trees, and then puts everything back when it disappears. And it's like, well,
terrifying.
Yeah, like is that at what point is the local kind of noble like charging this carnival to just this magic thing that's just turned up, or is it? But there's no discussion of it. It's just accepted that.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to go because it's happy. It's like the fair's in town. Do you know what I mean? Amazing. Like, apart from there's no discussion of how it works. There's no discussion of how it interacts with the other things. And it's just there's no background. There's no suspension of reality with this. It's just there's a lot that you just have to assume. You just take at face value and move on.
Right, yeah, and I get there is a certain amount of that always with this kind of thing, but it's for them to not even address it, and like the carnival doesn't even have like a dark secret. There's no one's been kidnapped at the heart of it or nothing. There's no conspiracy to unravel.
Very little. I mean, there's an element where there's these witches that rule the fairy realms, and they are allowed to steal from people in the carnival, but only people who haven't bought tickets. So anyone who sneaks, exactly right. So anyone who goes into the carnival, legit, buys a ticket and goes in is safe from these thieves. But anyone who doesn't buy a ticket, it's almost like D&D are going, well, if you've got your passport, then you can't be hurt. But if anyone who sneaks into the carnival like a dirty, sneaky thief, then you can get, and you won't even get hurt. You'll just have something stolen from you. And the things that you can get stolen from you include like your fashion sense and like your singing voice and like all of these like weird things. That again, just it's comical. It's very comical.
Yeah, because you don't want to get your best axe stolen off you, do you? Because it's got to be able to be something that anyone can have stolen, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh man, I mean the social implications of all that hurt in my head. I've got like Marxist theory flashing through my brain right now, and I just don't even want to think about the implications of stealing only from people who haven't paid for a ticket and that kind of thing. That's hurting my politics brain. That is. So let's move on from that quickly, please, because I can feel myself exploding. But I mean, what a disappointment, man. I was really hoping that they would actually pull something unique out the bag, because it's a good challenge to set yourself, especially for a company of this size, And now I feel like I'm picturing, I just saw the cover on the video here that me and you were talking to each other, so I've seen a bit of the cover in that, but I'm picturing this book as a kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, and then in a subtitle underneath it's like kids in like balloon fancy writing, or like Dungins and Dwangins or something with like
very much so
play block letters. It just seems like just the wrong direction to have started down with this idea. There's just so many infinitely more interesting ways you could have gone with that. So I'm going to register my disappointment with this one.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, there's some things to enjoy. I mean, as always, production quality is great. There's some great maps. There's some locations that, if they weren't so sickly sweet, would be interesting. There's an annoying thing as well where it introduces this storytelling spider, weirdly named the Yarn Spinner. Yeah, good one, guys. Great. The book is full of these silly names.
Fuck's sake.
But this spider is detailed in Domains of Delight, which is a Feywild supplement, which is available on the D&D Guild online. And it's like, oh, guys, come on, this like cross promotion is just like is really doing my head in. So it just doesn't. It's relentlessly sweet is the problem. That you never really get a chance to think about the fact that some of these encounters or places could be quite sinister if they were played differently.
I know, yeah. It sounds like too good to be true. I'm expecting there to be some dark secret underneath it all, almost.
And there's really not, or not enough. It's a real shame. And the other thing they've done as well, just to kind of round off this book, they've introduced two adventuring groups, one called the League of Malevolence and one called, I think it's like the Heroes League or whatever, Valor's Call. So they're a group of good heroes and a group of bad villains who really serve no purpose to the rest of the adventure, apart from the fact that they're also wandering around doing their own thing, and you can cross swords with the bad guys and meet the good guys. But the reason to put it in here is in the good group are some classic Dungeons and Dragons cartoon heroes. Strongheart, for instance, is in there, and is it Elkhorn the dwarf? Anyone who's a fan of old Dungeons and Dragons cartoon or whatever will recognize these characters. There were action figures in the 70s and 80s and stuff like that, and it seems like they've just thrown them into this book because they just had page count to fill. And we also have Warduke, which most people will remember from the guy with the winged helmet and the fiery sword in his kind of barbarian chainmail bikini type thing, who was a bad guy from the cartoon. They put him in there. a remorseless killer for hire who can be easily bought. Nobody knows what Warduke looks like under his dread helmet. His dread helmet, by the way, because he never removes his helmet to reveal his face to others. You know, I mean, come on, guys. Like, this is just... Even the villains are two-dimensional, and it's just all really, really bad. It's just, yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff in here.
And the wrong place to put Warduke as well. You don't want to put Warduke in this module, do you? You want to put him in something brutal.
There's no reason that he should be in here, absolutely, other than the fact that I think it's just another reason for people to pick the book up. But yeah, anyway, that is Wild Beyond The Witchlight. I think if you are enjoying the way D&D is going, then maybe this is for you. If you want to sit and play, you know, cutesy wootsy D&D and just, you know, racing snails around with each other and go on a magical train through the clouds and speak to trees and all that kind of stuff, then have at that. There's tons of fun in there for you. But if you actually want to do any what I would call adventuring, exploration, or, you know, fighting, or even the traps and stuff are all very, very lame.
So stay tuned for Human Energy Field's first actual play of Wild Beyond The Witchlight.
I mean, it'd be tough. It'd be really tough. I mean, yeah. I just can't envisage doing it. Yeah, I think it would annoy me to watch people playing this as it's intended. I don't think I could. And there must be some actual players of people doing this online somewhere, and I think that would be the kind of thing that would make me break my computer. So,
I'd like to include this carnival only as something to be massacred, like Anakin Skywalker massacres all the younglings. You know, something just for the players to sweep through in like a kind of wave of chaos and mayhem.
Yeah, I mean, they could have done some really good stuff with it. The carnival could come through and maybe like it could either steal children or steal things, and like maybe the children end up working for the carnival. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I was expecting something like that.
Yeah, and it's like nah. Everyone who works for the carnival seems to be having a great time. You know what I mean? Like,
fuck them.
Yeah.
What a fucking fuck off. Have a great time.
And there's actually before we leave it, there's a mechanic in there in the carnival where there's a tracker as to how good a time people are having. So the mood of the carnival moves from like happy to sad, and if the characters do things like, you know, upset people and don't play the rides or whatever, and are mean to people, like the sad factor, like the mood factor goes down. But then if they're really nice to people, the mood factor goes up, and it's just like, come on, guys, like, please.
You're quantifying my emotions in a way that I don't want them to be quantified. Yeah. Okay, well, now I know how I'd spend my time, is trying to get everyone as sad and as angry and depressed as possible across the whole carnival.
And you'd be pleased to know that it doesn't change the game. So.
Oh, God, right, okay.
Has no real effect. So,
okay, all right. Well, what a way to end the episode, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, that's brilliant, man. Thank you for bringing this up. And to be honest, I'm glad we spent as much time talking about it as we did, because it's, regardless, fascinating book.
I think it's going to have ripples in the industry. This book, I think it's going to affect how people view Dungeons and Dragons and how people view role playing games on the mass shelf as well. I think we'll see a bit more of this, and I think we'll be able to pinpoint Witchlight as maybe the genesis of this movement, which I think will really gain traction through the end of this year and into next. I think we'll see a lot of non-combat RPGs coming out.
You heard it here first, folks. Human Energy Field, always with the predictions, usually correct in spirit, if not in fact. Just thanks, Jamie. Thank you for listening, everyone, as always. Thank you particularly to my friend Christian, who I know is listening from New Zealand. So thanks, pal, for tuning in. We're going to get a game set up at some point. Again, just to reiterate briefly, if you are interested in coming to Leeds at the end of November 2021, on the 28th, give one of us a message. Alternatively, Google the Dungeon Punks Trial by Dice. Get yourself a ticket. Come on down. We'll see you there.
Yeah, and as always, if you've got any thoughts or questions about any of the games or topics that we've discussed, please go on the Discord and hit us up. Links in the Instagram bio, and you can either share your thoughts about D&D or ask me more questions about it, or whatever, as I say, or the Cypher system, or any of the other topics that we've covered. Or if you are going to Leeds and you want to organise catching up before the event or whatever, then yeah, please do that.
hit us up. And if you've played Wild Beyond The Witchlight and you have an experience of it, come and let us know how it went. We'd really like to hear. I'm sure it was magically, wonderfully rainbow pretty time for you, and I'm sure it was... everyone was very happy. I'm not bitter about that at all. And with that, we will see you next time, guys. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned, stay safe, and as always, stay hydrated.